So the crux of what we'll be discussing today is mostly around what are the important architectures that were popular in literature. So yeah, some concept revision. I think if you want me to revise any concept, right, like what is batch normalization or what is dropout or any concept you feel is not clear, you can ask me. I'll try to do that because we have gone through a lot of concepts over the past two classes, right? So yeah, if you feel some topic is not clear, we can do that. Otherwise, we can go forward. Uh, yeah, after that, we'll see how convolution works in more depth because what we'll see is in few architectures that are coming, unless and until you have an understanding of how convolution works in more depth, right? You'll not be able to understand what that architecture is doing. So yeah, that's why we'll do a little bit of revision of how convolution works, but in more depth. After that, we will see what are the various CNN architectures which are popular. So yeah, we'll go through that. Once that is done, we'll try to see what are the advanced training techniques and then the first further steps, how to go, where to go from here after this task is done in deep learning journey or similarly in the career sort of. So this is the agenda for today. Okay, so someone is asking what is batch normalization and yeah, if I can repeat myself, so I'll try to do that. Someone is asking label smoothing. Yeah, I'll do that. Anything else? Okay, so I think people are interested about these two techniques. If you want to add anything, keep posting. I'll try to discuss about them more. Yeah, I will try to do that. But again, I mean, I can tell what are the kinds of projects you can do. But again, that is something you should go back and try to see how you can collect data and try to learn stuff on top of that one and try to do. Yeah, so that is something you need to do yourself. I'll try to tell what are the kinds of projects that are possible. Based on that, you can go back and see how you can do them. I'll try to do that. Okay. Yeah. Someone asked what is batch normalization. So why batch normalization is needed? Because we saw that if there is no normalization, right, it can happen that across every batch, whenever you get a new batch, you can get a very spike in update. So due to these spikes in updates that is coming across every batch, right, what can happen is uh, yeah, what can happen is your weights can go up and down a lot. Weights, by weights I mean CNN is, you know what weights mean. So weights are the values that are present in your filters. So these values, these needs to be updated in every iteration during the gradient descent batch propagation process. If you remember from the first two classes that we try to tend to update these values, right? So what happens is these updates, these can actually become very high or very low, and because of that what happens is your network becomes very unstable and you'll not be able to actually have a smooth ride to your global environment. So you'll be having like a very bumpy ride, and it might sometimes happen that yeah, you might actually not even go in the right direction and you will be going all around. So that is something we want to avoid. To avoid this, what we want to do is you don't want to have this kind of random spikes coming across every batch. To do this, what you do is before every layer, right, we try to see what is the input that is coming from the previous layer and we try to normalize it. By normalize it, what we mean is if some value is very high and some value is very slow, we try to bring both of them in the similar scale. So this normalization is something you might have actually seen in your class exams or something like that also, if you have seen in case. So where if you they see that someone is having a very high score and it is actually changing the dynamics of the entire group of students, right? They try to normalize the scores, sort of. So this is regarding your exam scores. So this kind of normalization, I don't know if it happened in your college, but in general, in few colleges, they do this kind of normalization of the scores so that there won't be too high scores and too low scores. Yeah, same thing is kind of happening here, sort of. So, or maybe if we see that the heights of all the people who are present here, right, there might be one or two outliers, sort of. So someone is having like 7 feet height maybe, and someone is having like a 3 feet. So those are the outliers, and because of that, our data can get very skewed. We don't want to do that. So normalization tries to remove that and make them all of them in a similar range, sort of. So that is what normalization does. Um, and we want to do it before every layer before sending the output to the next layer. So batch normalization tries to do that. We saw what we can do with the input normalization, where we try to divide by 2 and bring all the values between 0 to 1. Batch normalization is a kind of doing something similar, although not the same thing, before every layer. So before getting the output from previous layer, we pass it through uh, a batch normalization layer, which normalizes the values and sends it across to the next layer, so that there is not a very huge high or spikes that can alter the weights a lot. So how this works is it works by finding out what is the mean of that batch and finding out what is the variance of the batch. So I hope people are aware of what is mean and variance. Mean is like the average value of the pixel in that batch. So if you have like 32 images in your batch, right? That is your batch size. You find out what is the average value in that batch and use that as mean. And then variance is about how much every pixel in your batch differs from the mean pixel. So once you find out what is the mean and variance, right, you remove that and then add another factors, another two factors called scale and shift. So those are similar to what you removed, but only thing is these will be consistent across every batch. These are not something which are learned by the network, and it's not like changing across. These mu and variance that we have removed, right? Those values change across every batch. Whenever you give another batch, right, you'll be getting different mu and different variance. So, but this gamma and beta, which you can see in the figure here, are consistent across, and these are the values that are learned by the network. So those values don't change, and since these are learned by the network, right, you will not see very huge spikes or shift across every batch. So that is what normalization does, trying to remove those spikes or shifts by using these learned parameters instead of having random parameters every time. I hope this part is clear what batch normalization does and how it helps. Right? Is this clear, or still you have some doubt? So, like, yeah, Sharad. Cool. Yeah, if you still have some doubt or anything particularly is not clear, point it out. I'll try to talk about that. But in case not, we can proceed forward. Someone asked me what is label smoothing. So yeah, label smoothing is something you need not worry about in the data sets which are available for you, because those are pretty clear. The data sets are clear. By clear, I mean like there won't be any wrong labeling, sort of. So you don't find if you have a data set of cats and dogs, right? You don't have images of cats which are mislabeled as dogs in general, because someone has looked into the data set and made sure that the data set is perfect. But what happens is, in real world, there will be humans who are actually working on creating the data set for industrial scenario. Say I'm working in Samsung, right? So I wanted to do this task of dog versus cat classification. So what I will do is, so there is another team who does this task of finding out the data, creating the data, and labeling them. But what happens is, since they are humans and they have to like do it at a fast pace, they can't actually make sure that the quality is there always. So they try to get done it at a very fast pace, and due to that, there might be possible that there are some images which are not very uh, proper. That means that they are mislabeled. A dog can be mislabeled as a cat, and a cat can be mislabeled as a dog. But now what happens is, since we are not aware that the data is not proper, we still try to tell the network that you should label the mislabeled ones as also proper. So to avoid that, what we can do is we can actually use label smoothing. So what label smoothing tells is, it tells the network that whatever I am providing you as input might not be always correct, because I uh, yeah, we have seen that people make mistakes and they might actually mislabel the data. So we are trying to tell the network, don't always try to fit the values exactly to the input I have given, because I might be wrong sometimes. So that's why you can have a margin of error. You need not be 100% confident. If you're 90% confident also, it is fine, right? So that is what label smoothing does. Label smoothing, for example, if you have two classes, right? So instead of having labels of 0 and 1 for the classes, so I mean, what I mean is, if you have a cat and a dog in the output, so you'll be having only two nodes in the output, right? So if a cat is there, so the cat node will be 1 and the dog node will be 0. This is the kind of output we expect. But with label smoothing, what we do is we alter those values and say that I don't need 1 in the case of cat. I'm satisfied with having 0.9 in the case of cat and 0.1 in the case of dog. You need not be 100% confident that it is cat. You can tell me with 90% confidence that it is a cat. Because of that, there might be actually, yeah, it is like a probability only, because there is a probability of some of the images kind of being mislabeled, right? So you need not be 100% sure. Those can go into the error side, sort of. So that is what we are trying to do. So can we consider label smoothing as threshold? No, threshold is always like, if it is greater than some threshold, you classify it as right. Only thing is, we are trying to tell the network that you don't need to be very confident on the data that you are getting, and you should not always give with 100% accuracy that it has to be that. You can be wrong, and I am okay with that. That is something we are trying to tell neural network with label smoothing. Because of that, why is label smoothing important is, if we haven't done this right, what it tries to do is, for the mislabeled data also, it will try to extract some features which will make sure that it can label it properly, although it is not right. So we don't want this to happen. So if it still tries to find some features which it can use to label a mislabeled one as right, that means that neural network is not getting the right set of features, because we want cat to have cat features and dog to have dog features when it is making the classification, right? I mean, those features are needed by the network to figure out like whether it is a cat or a dog. It needs to figure out what are the cat features, what are the dog features, and use those to figure out what is a cat or dog. But now I have an image which is a cat, but it is mislabeled as a dog. So that what neural network does is, even though it finds cat features, it is not supposed to say it is a cat. So it will try to find some other extra feature which it can use to classify it as a dog, right? Because of this, the network is trying very hard to somehow classify even the wrongly labeled data. But that is something which would like to avoid, because if the data is wrong, it should not go forward and say and pick a wrong feature and try to make it fit somehow. So it is kind of a regularization technique, right? So what it does is, we are trying to tell the network that whatever data, it might not be always correct. So you don't need to be 100% confident that something has to be right. 90% confidence is fine. The other 10% comes off like an error, sort of. So label smoothing is not softmax. Softmax outputs, right? Those are actually the label smoothed values. So whatever output you get at the end is the softmax value. So previously the softmax value, we said like it has to be 1 and 0. Now we are saying that it need not be 1 and 0. It can be 0.9 and 0.1. So that is what label smoothing is. So YOLO is something which is a much complex network than what we have discussed so far, because it does not only classification, but it also does object detection, which we have now discussed here. So object detection is where it finds out what are all the objects present and where are all the objects present. So we have seen the applications of deep learning in the first class, if you remember. So object detection is one application where you try to find out where the object is also present, not only see if the object is present in the image or not. So yeah, that is how it works. Label smoothing, is it used in YOLO? So you can use, so it does two tasks. One task is the classification task and another task is the detection task. So for the classification task, you can use label smoothing. It should give good results. So yeah, label smoothing can always be used whenever you are working with real world data. But if you have data sets which are already cleaned and very proper, right, you don't need to go for label smoothing. Like in the case of MNIST, it is made 100% sure that the data is proper. Similarly, in the case of CFARTN also, it is made 100% sure that the data set is proper. So in that case, you need not go for label smoothing. So someone asked what is padding, I guess. Yeah, so padding is something we try to use whenever you want to control the size of the inputs that is coming. So we saw that whenever you are passing an input through a convolution layer, right, it size kind of gets decreased. So if you pass n cross n through 3 cross 3 filter and convolve it, you will be getting an output of n minus 2 cross n minus 2. To avoid this, what you can do is you can actually pad your input with 1 pixel across the border. So in this case, you can see that there is a 5 cross 5 input. I'm padding it with one pixel across the border. So now it becomes 7 cross 7, right? So if I pass this through 3 cross 3 filter now, the output I am getting is again 5 cross 5. So if you want to control it in this way, such that your input size doesn't change, right? What you can do is you can pad it with a certain number of pixels. You can define what is the pixel number. So that is what padding is generally used for, to just add a few number of pixels here and there so that you can control the shape of the input, which is getting translated into the output. And you want this to happen because you need a certain number of kind of number somewhere. So for example, uh, at some point you wanted the input to be of size of 32 cross 32, right? But your input is only 30 cross 30. If you want to make it 32 cross 32, what you can do is instead of resizing or something like that, you can do padding. You can just add an additional 1 pixel across the border. Now it becomes 32 cross 32. So in those kind of use cases, you generally use padding whenever you want to control the input to make it a closer shape, which you want to have at that point of time, right? You generally go for something like a padding. Is it clear what padding is? So someone asked what is gradient descent. So what is gradient descent? What do you think is gradient descent? I'm asking everyone. What is gradient descent? Can someone tell what is gradient descent? So I hope everyone has gone through the videos that I have shared, right? So can someone tell what is gradient descent? Yes. So most of you are correct. So whenever you have a loss function, right? We know that we use a loss function to determine whether to how to update the weights, right? We loss function is our way of determining whether we are doing properly or not. So once you know the loss function, you actually get a direction saying that which direction you need to update your weights. So that grade direction is defined by the algorithm called gradient descent. Gradient descent tells you what is the update that needs to be done across all the weights that are present in your network. So say consider it similar to like the hill example we have discussed, right? So this blue line, you're at this point, you need to actually go and reach the global minima, which is in the case here. So if you are at this point, either you can go up or you can go down. That is either you can go right or you can go left. If you go left, your error decreases. If you go right, your error increases. So gradient descent tells you what is the direction of weight update. So we know that we can actually change the loss based on the weights that are present. So if you update the weights, your output will differ, and the output differs, the loss will change. This is how it works in general, sort of. So gradient descent will try to tell how much update you need to make to all the weights. And once you do that, your loss changes and you try to go in a direction. So that is what gradient descent does. You start from one point, any point in the hill, and try to find out what is the loss at that point. Once you find out the loss, you try to find out which direction to go using the gradient descent algorithm. And once you find out what is the direction, try to move in that direction until you reach a minimum. This is what gradient descent does in general. Backpropagation, what it does is it tells us how to actually do the gradient descent algorithm consecutively across different layers, starting from the final layer. How do we backpropagate the gradient descent from the final layer to the previous layer to the previous layer until we reach the input layer? So yeah, this is the entire way how the neural network learns about its weights and biases or any other hyperparameter. Right? Is this clear? Great. Thanks. So someone is asking if I can share all the links. So I'll be sharing again all the content across at the end of the class if required. So I'll do that. I'll share all the 5 classes content together. Yes. So yeah, you generally have a bias for every neuron in a hidden layer. Every neuron will have its own bias. Bias is one value you add to the output you get by multiplying both the weights and similarly the input from the previous layer, whatever that value is there, right? To that value, you just add one value that is present at the hidden neuron. That is the bias. So it is present at every neuron in a hidden layer. So I guess that's it. So we'll start with today's class, I guess. So yeah, this is where we'll start with. We saw that we actually have a convolution which helps us in finding out what are the features that are required for the classification or any other kind of task, right? So we saw that convolution happens across 2D, but the ideal thing is convolution doesn't actually happen across 2D, it happens across 3D. So that is something we haven't talked about before, but I'll talk about it now. So this is the input I have. So I have an input of image of size 7 cross 7 cross 3. So 7 cross 7 is the width and height, and 3 is the RGB. So 3 channels I have. So we know that image will have 3 color channels, right? RGB. So this is my input I'm having. 7 cross 7 cross 3. I need to get an output after convolving with few filters of size 3 cross 3. So I have only 2 filters here. So I'll be getting output number of channels is 2. And yeah, some convolution is happening, so that's why there is a reduction in size. So 7 cross 7 become 3 cross 3. But how it happens is, so since it's a 3 cross 3, sorry, it has 3 channels, right? Every filter that is present, 3 cross 3 filter, it is supposed to have 3 channels as well. So how many channels are present in the input image? Those number of channels are supposed to be present in the filter that it convolves with as well. So if there are 3 channels that are present in the input, there should be 3 channels present in every filter as well. So just like how there are 3 channels here, so there are 3 channels in the first filter and similarly 3 channels in the second filter. So how it happens is you do convolution of the first channel with the first filter. Second channel, I mean, in the first filter first channel and input first channel, input second channel and first filter second channel, input third channel and first filter third channel. Once you have these values, right, you sum it up to get one value and you take that value as one output. And similarly, you do it for second filter, you get another output. that is how it works. So to make it clear again, although the example is not exactly clear, ignore this 3 cross 3 output here, and similarly ignore the padding here. So we know that when we convolve a 7 cross 7 input with 3 cross 3 filter, right, what output we'll be getting is a 5 cross 5, because we know that when we do a convolution with 3 cross 3 filter, we get reduced by 2 pixels. So n cross n, when we are passing through 3 cross 3, you get n minus 2 cross n minus 2, right? This part is clear. So what happens is, in this case, there are some number of channels that are present in the input layer, and for every channel that is present in an input layer, the filter is supposed to have those many number of channels as well. So if you convolve this 5 cross 5 input with this 3 cross 3 filter, I'm talking about only the first channel in both of them, you will be getting a 3 cross 3 output. This is what we know, right? So I'm getting a 3 cross 3 output for the first channel. Similarly, for the second channel that is present in the input, I'm convolving with another 3 cross 3 of the second channel in the filter. So I'll be getting another 3 cross 3 output. Similarly, I do it for third channel, I get another 3 cross 3 output. So I got 3 cross 3 outputs, right? So what I'll do is I'll just add every pixel in that to get the final output. So probably it will be more clear with an example. I'll try to give an example. So say I have a matrix A which has channels A1, A2, A3. And then I have a filter F which has channels F1, F2, F3, right? This is the A is the image input and F is the filter. So what happens is, when you try to convolve A with F, right? A convolution with F is nothing but A1 convolution with F1 plus A2 convolution F2 plus A3 convolution F3, right? So every channel in input is convolved with every channel in the filter. This is, I am talking about only one filter. I have not come across like multiple filters, but yeah, consider the first filter. The filter will also have similar number of channels as the input. So input has 3 channels. The filter also has 3 channels. Every channel is convolved with every other channel, and you, whatever the values you get, right? You sum it up to get the resultant value. So, for example, if A is of size 5 cross 5 cross 3, so it is having height of 5, width of 5, and 3 channels. And F is a filter of size 3 cross 3 cross 3. We know that filter is of size 3 cross 3, and since it is having 3 channels, it is having of shape 3 cross 3 cross 3. So now what happens is, you do convolution similar to what we have mentioned before. So you take every channel is of size 5 cross 5, right? When you do convolution with 3 cross 3, you'll be getting 3 cross 3 output. So the output O1 will be 3 cross 3 output, O2 will be 3 cross 3 output, and O3 will be 3 cross 3 output. So what O1, O2, O3 is? O1 is nothing but A1 convolution F1. O2 is nothing but A2 convolution F2. O3 is nothing but A3 convolution F3. So these are all of size 3 cross 3. Now what I'll do is I'll just do matrix addition. So final output I get is also 3 cross 3. I think this is a little bit confusing because it's a little bit complex concept. But again, stay back and try to understand it, because it is very important thing when we go and discuss regarding architectures. So, yeah, I'll try to explain it again. So yeah, I have an image A of size 5 cross 5 cross 3. So I hope this part is clear. I have an input image A of size 5 cross 5 cross 3, and I have a filter of size 3 cross 3 cross 3. And why do I have this 3 extra 3? I'm asking, right? That is because we saw that any input image or similarly I mean, RGB image is supposed to have 3 channels, right? So that's why my input is also of 3 channels. We know that by channel, I mean depth. I hope everyone understands what is channel. So by channel, I'm meaning the depth. Depth means that RGB. So if you are having 3 color values, that means that your depth or number of channels is 3. So I'm having an input image of size 5 cross 5 and having 3 channels. So that is why my input is 5 cross 5 cross 3, right? This is input part is clear, I guess, right? Is this clear how my input is 5 cross 5 cross 3? Yeah. Once you have an input of 5 cross 5 cross 3, the filter size, right? So I'm talking about only one filter. So we'll come to the multiple filter part next. But think of one filter, only one filter. I want to convolve one filter onto this input of 5 cross 5 cross 3. So what I have is 3 matrices of size 5 cross 5. That is what 5 cross 5 cross 3 signifies. You are having an R matrix. It is three color values, right? So you are having R matrix of size 5 cross 5, G matrix of 5 cross 5, and B matrix of 5 cross 5. Now for every of this, uh, by default the channels are RGB. You can think of it like that. So for every color, right, in the filter also the particular color filter should be there. So that is why when your input is of size, I mean, if the number of channels in your input is 3, the number of channels in your filter is supposed to be 3 as well, right? Is this clear? If you're, I'm not talking about the width and height of the filter, but I'm talking about the depth of the filter. The depth of the input and depth of the filter are supposed to be the same. So if your depth of the input is 3, the depth of the filter is supposed to be 3 as well, because you need to do similar number of convolutions. So since the depth of input is 3, in our case, the depth of the filter is also 3. Is that clear? How the depth of the filter is 3? Okay. So we know that in general, the shape of a filter is 3 cross 3, right? So I'm having a filter of shape 3 cross 3, but 3 channels. So that is why my shape of the filter is 3 cross 3 cross 3. Previously, we were only talking about 2D, but now it has come to 3D. That's why it's a little bit confusing. But all 3 filters will be of same shape. All 3 filters will, actually, it's not like 3 filters. It is like only single filter, but multiple channels in the same filter. So you will have 3 channels in a single filter. So my input is having 3 channels, and similarly my filter is also having 3 channels, right? If you remember what I have mentioned before, so A is of size 5 cross 5 cross 3, and my filter is supposed to have also 3 channels in the final layer. And similarly, the filter size can be anything. So instead of 3 cross 3 cross 3, it can be, I mean, I can have a 5 cross 5 filter. If I'm having a 5 cross 5 filter, right, it will be 5 cross 5 cross 3. So I can change the width and height, but the number of channels is fixed based on the input. So F can be 2 cross 2 cross 3. Anything is fine. Like I can change the width and height, but the depth is fixed because the depth is dependent upon the input. How many channels are present in the input? Those many number of channels are supposed to be present in the filter as well. Yeah, if you are having only one channel input, you will be having only one channel in filter as well. Then it will be 3 cross 3 cross 1 instead of 3 cross 3 cross 3, which is in this case. Okay, so yeah, this part is clear. You have input which is of 5 cross 5 cross 3, filter which is of 3 cross 3 cross 3, right? Once you have this, you can do convolution. How you do is, it is like having 3 5 cross 5 filters. A is nothing but like consider it like A1, A2, A3. So A1 is 5 cross 5, A2 is 5 cross 5, and A3 is 5 cross 5 as well. These are the 3 channels that are present in input, right? Yeah, so I am having an input of 5 cross 5 cross 3. So I can write it like I am having 3 channels of each of size 5 cross 5. So I am dividing A into 3 channels, A1, A2, A3. So A1 is the first channel, A2 is the second channel, A3 is the third channel. So since I'm having it this way, so A1 is 5 cross 5 size, A2 is 5 cross 5 size, A3 is 5 cross 5 size. Now it is just a 2D matrix, similar to what we have seen before, right? Is that clear? What A1, A2, A3 here? And how it came from A? Yeah. Similarly, F, right? F is again, we saw that it is a filter of size 3 cross 3, but it has 3 channels. So I can also write it as F is equals to F1, F2, F3. And all of them are size of size 3 cross 3. F1 is 3 cross 3, F2 is 3 cross 3, and F3 is 3 cross 3 as well. Right? So yeah, I have divided input into this way and filter into this way. Once I have done this, I can do the convolution as you know before. So say my say star is a convolution operation. Then a convolution with f is nothing but a1 convolution with f1 plus a2 convolution f2 plus a3 convolution f3. This is the formula. This is because only 3 channels are there. If there are more number of channels, right, your expansion will be there as well. So if you are having only 2 channels, it will be only 2 values. If you are having 5 channels, it will be having 5 values. But this is how it happens. So we know A1 convolution with F1 is nothing but you are having a 3 cross 3 matrix which is divided across 5 cross 5. You will be getting a 3 cross 3 output, if you remember, right? Which is what we saw in this figure. This is the thing we saw. Like you are having a 3 cross 3 filter which is going across a 5 cross 5 input, you will be getting a 3 cross 3 output. This is in a 2D case. Right? So if you are doing it for 3D, it becomes like this. Like you are having convolving with every filter, every channel in the input with every channel in the filter. You'll be getting a 3 cross 3 output. Whatever outputs you get, right? You just add them. So if you are adding 3 matrices of size 3 cross 3, you will be getting another 3 cross 3 output. Okay, because there are so many threes, this is confusing. But say you are adding 3 matrices of size 5 cross 5, right? You will be getting a 5 cross 5 output. So I'm having like let's say A1 into F1 is O1. So just consider this. So what is the shape of O1, O2, O3? Can someone say? I know that A1, yeah, all of them are of shape 3 cross 3. Exactly. Once you get this, if you add all of them, right, the output you will be getting is also 3 cross 3 because you are just adding all the pixels at every position and keeping the sum in the output. Yeah, right. So if you are adding O1, O2, O3, right, what you will be getting? O equals to O1 plus O2 plus O3, right? What O does is O is also of shape 3 cross 3. So just to give an example, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4. This is one matrix. I'm having another matrix 5, 6. So just think I'm trying to add these two values, right? What I'll do is I'll take every pixel at every position and add it with the corresponding pixel in the other position. So I'll get 1 plus 5, which is 6, 2 plus 6, 8, 3 plus 7, 10, and 4 plus 8, 12. So I get another matrix of same size, right? So I'm adding two cross 2 matrices. I'm getting an output of size 2 cross 2, right? So similarly, if I add 3 cross 3 matrices, I'll be getting an output of size 3 cross 3, right? Because we are just adding all the pixels that are present at the same position together. Is this clear? Great. So what we have seen? We have seen that we have started with 5 cross 5 cross 3 input, and your filter is of size 3 cross 3 cross 3. And what is the output you are getting? When I'm convolving a 5 cross 5 cross 3 input with a 3 cross 3 cross 3 value, yeah, the output you will be getting is 3 cross 3. Exactly. Right. Awesome. Perfect. This is because for every channel we are doing the convolution, and once we get the outputs across every channel, right, we sum it up, we will be getting a single output of size 3 cross 3 in this case, right? So say I want to do it for 7 cross 7 cross 3 input with a 3 cross 3 cross 3 filter. What is the output I will be getting? Exactly 5 cross 5. If I am having a 9 cross 9 cross 32 input, right, what would be the filter size for a 3 cross 3 convolution? Yeah, before that I'm asking like what would be the filter size? Filter size. So overall 3 cross 3 cross 32. Exactly. And if you do the convolution, what is the output you will be getting? Okay, the answers are coming different this time. You are actually having an input of 9 cross 9 cross 32, which you are convolving with a filter of size 3 cross 3 cross 32. What is the output you will be getting? You will be getting 7 cross 7 output. You are not getting 7 cross 7 cross 32, because you will be again every channel in those 32 channels in input is convolved with every channel in the filter, and we once the values are convolved, right, you will be getting 32 outputs. You sum across all these outputs to get a single output which is of size 7 cross 7, right? So you will not get 7 cross 7 cross 32, you will get 7 cross 7, single 7 cross 7 output. That is because once you get 7 cross 7 cross 32 values, right, I mean you have 32 outputs, you sum all these values so that you will be getting a single value at the output. That is what convolution does. For every filter, you convolve with for every channel in input, you convolve with a channel in filter. You'll be getting a channel in output. All these channels in the output are summed together to get a single channel. So the output will always be a single channel, right? So yeah, when you do the convolution, you will be getting 32 layers, 32 channels of 7 cross 7. You add all these before sending it. So when you do add all these, right, you'll be getting a single output of 7 cross 7. We saw that when we added two cross 2 matrices together, right, we are getting actually only a single 2 cross 2 matrix, because all the pixels at the same position are added together, sort of, right? So same thing is happening here. So we are having 7 cross 7 matrix and 32 of them. When you add all of them together, you are getting a single value, single 7 cross 7 output, right? Okay, I'm having 15 cross 15 cross 36 input. So if I'm going to use a filter of size 3 cross 3, so what is the overall shape of the filter is supposed to be? I mean, 3 cross 3 is the, yeah, 3 cross 3 cross 36, exactly. right? Because we are using a filter of size 3 cross 3 and you are supposed to have the same number of channels in the filter as the same number of channels in input, right? So you are supposed to get 3 cross 3 cross 36, right? If you do this convolution, what is the output you will be getting? Yeah, you will be getting 13 cross 13, single 13 cross 13 output, right? Cool. So if someone is still not clear, probably we can. Okay, the question is that I have an input of size 15 cross 15 cross 36 and I'm convolving with a filter of size 3 cross 3 cross 36. What is the output I'll be getting? So the output will be, because we know that when you convolve with that, you'll be getting a single 13 cross 13 output. Exactly. Great. So now we have done it for only one filter, right? Now let's see if we add multiple filters, how this is going to be, right? So we know that when we have one filter of size, so yeah, again coming back, I'm having an input of say 7 cross 7 cross say like 6. So I'm having this input. When I'm passing it through a filter of size 3 cross 3 cross 6, right? The output I will be getting is 5 cross 5. If I pass it through another filter of size 3 cross 3 cross 3, 3 cross 3 cross 6, I'll get another output of size 5 cross 5. Right? So now when I concatenate these two, I'll be getting the output filter size is 5 cross 5 cross 2. Yeah, that is because now I am having two filters, right? So if I am convolving an input of 7 cross 7 cross 6 with two filters of size 3 cross 3 cross 6, you will be getting an output of size 5 cross 5 cross 2. So yeah, I know that this gets a bit confusing, but yeah, if you still feel confused, probably we'll try to repeat. So yeah, I'll try to do that. Again, from the start. So if you know that you are having an input of size 7 cross 7 cross 6, right? If I want to have a filter of size 3 cross 3, it is supposed to have the same number of channels that are present in input. So the size of the filter is supposed to be 3 cross 3 cross 6. Right? This part should be clear that the size of the filter should be 3 cross 3 cross 6, because the channel size in both the input and the filter is supposed to be the same. Right? Yes, your output, right? It is supposed to have 6 channels, but it will not have 6 channels because you add all these outputs. You will be getting a single 5 cross 5 output. This is for a single filter. But say if I, instead of having a single filter, I can have n filters of size 3 cross 3 cross 6. What is the output I will get? I will be getting 5 cross 5 cross n. Right? Is this part clear? Okay. So this is how the notation looks like. So say I have 7 cross 7 cross 3 input, because I am having a RGB input. I'm convolving with a 3 cross 3 filter, which is also having 3 channels, because we know that yeah, so it is also having 3 channels, because it is supposed to have the same number of input channels, right? So once we have that, we have 32 of them. So at the output also we'll be having 32 output. So this is how the notation looks like. So I have an input of size 7 cross 7 and having 3 channels, right? So 7 cross 7 cross 3. I'm passing it through a filter of size 3 cross 3 and having 3 channels. So it is 3 cross 3 cross 3, but I'm having 32 of them. I'm having 32 filters of size 3 cross 3 cross 3. So I'll be getting an output of size 5 cross 5 and again 32 channels that is present in the output. So this is how the entire notation looks like, right? Cool. So whenever you want to do this calculation, right, the simple way would be like you try to ignore the number of channels, because the channels will always be same in the input and the filter, right? Yeah, there are 32 filters. So you can ignore that. Only see what is the shape of the input in the width and height. We know that 7 cross 7 is the input width and height, right? So if you try to pass it through a filter of size 3 cross 3, we note that at the output you are supposed to get 5 cross 5. And we see how many of them are there. We see that 32 of them are there. So that's why it's 5 cross 5 cross 32. That is how you try to get it. Try to see what is the shape of, I mean, what is the width and height of the input, what is the width and height of the output, I mean, width and height of the filter. Once you do that, do the convolution, you know the width and height of the output. Once you say, have that, try to find out how many filters are there. You will be having those many outputs. That is the easy part, how to figure out, like, go from input to output, right? Cool. So yeah, I'm having an input. Yeah. So I hope everyone can see my screen. So I'm having an input of 64 cross 64 cross 63, right? So if I'm supposed to convert it into 62 cross 62 cross 16, right? This is the input, this is the output. So what is the filter size supposed to be? Can someone say what is the filter shape? Uh, yeah, so Tushar is right. So the filter shape is supposed to be 3 cross 3 cross 3 cross 16, because you know that the number of channels in input are supposed to be same as the number of channels in the filter. So your filter, and again we saw that the reduction in size is only 2 pixels, so it has supposed to be of width and height 3 cross 3, and the number of channels is fixed by the input, so it is of size 3. So 3 cross 3 cross 3 is one filter, and we are supposed to have 16 outputs, so that's why you multiply it with 16, so you'll be getting 3 cross 3 cross 3 cross 16, right? Is that clear? And how about if you want to go from 62 cross 62 cross 16 to 60 cross 60 cross 32? How many parameters? I mean, how many filters? I mean, how many, what is the shape of the filter? If you are going from 62 cross 62 cross 16 to 60 cross 60 cross 32. Exactly. Awesome. Yeah, everyone is right. So that is how you, not everyone is right. So the result is 3 cross 3 cross 16 cross 32. So yeah, don't get confused with the 3 number. Try to see how many channels are present in the input. Those many number of channels are supposed to be present in your filter as well. So 3 cross 3 cross 16, and try to see how many outputs are supposed to be there. So it is supposed to be 3 cross 3 cross 16 cross 32. That is how you figure it out. Yeah. 62 cross 62 cross 16, right? Once you have that, you try to see what is the output you are getting. Output is supposed to have 32 channels, right? So that means that you are supposed to have 32 filters. That is something which is fixed. So your fourth dimension in your filter shape is already fixed. Fourth dimension is 32. Now you need to figure out the other dimensions. So again, the first and second dimension, that is the width and height, is determined by how many pixels are getting shifted. So we know that only 2 pixels are getting reduced. That means that we are using a 3 cross 3 filter, right? So that is fixed. So what is remaining is the number of channels that are present in every filter. How do you determine the number of channels that are present in every filter? That is equal to the number of channels that are present in the input, which is 16. So the final output you are supposed to get is 3 cross 3 cross 16 cross the number of filters, that is 32. Is that clear? Cool. I hope everyone got this. So we'll see that this actually has implications when we are talking about one particular architecture. But before that, I'll try to again show the figure that I have famously shown in the first class. So these are the architectures, different architectures which reduced the accuracy overall as you proceeded from the beginning to the end. So we know that this is where the shift happened. Previously, people were using machine learning, but after this, people have started using deep learning, and from then onwards, only deep learning. So these are the various popular architectures, and we'll try to cover some of them. So we'll cover AlexNet, VGG, GoogleNet, ResNet. So, and similarly, one more architecture, DenseNet. So these are the very popular architectures which are present and which were kind of beating each other across as every year goes on. So before we get started with AlexNet, the first architecture which was proposed in 1998, long time ago, before neural networks were kind of used, is LayNet. At that time, it was not very popular, neural network in general, because we didn't have that much amount of computational power. So people tried it out only just as an experiment sort of. So that is why, and also, I mean, they were not able to get good results because many training techniques that were very popular right now were not popular then. So people were not able to get good results then. So LayNet is the starting point sort of. So it is developed by a very famous scientist called Jan LeCun. So that's why it is named after him, LayNet. So he's one of the pioneers of AI sort of. So generally talking, they generally used 5x5 convolutions. So at that time, 3x3 was not very popular. So people used 5x5 convolutions, and in the activation function, they didn't use ReLU. They used TANH activation function across. So the shape is similar to what we have seen before. You have an input. So it was done for black and white images. It was not done for RGB images. And that's why only one channel is there. So you are passing it through some convolutional layers. You got one conv output. You pass it through pooling, and again you do it one more layer, and finally you flatten it out and you get an output. So this is a very basic architecture of LayNet. So it was not very popular because it was done for a very simple task, and also the size of the network is very small. But yeah, we all heard about this story called AlexNet. AlexNet is very famous for bringing hype into the deep learning. So this was the architecture we will discuss right now. So this was able to achieve that success because it reduced 10% the previous state of the art error. So it did this by applying few techniques. So one technique it introduced is the ReLU activation function. So they have some previously people were trying out sigmoid and TANH, but those were not actually giving good results, and it was not able to train it properly. So ReLU was introduced. After introducing ReLU, they saw that the results are improved immediately. So AlexNet introduced ReLU activation function. It stood first in 2012 challenge. They use different kinds of convolutions. So what they have used is they have used 11x11 convolution, 5x5, 3x3. All kinds of convolutions are there. So you can see that the input shape is 227x227x3. So it is an RGB image of shape 227x227, which you are supposed to give to the network as input. Once you do that, you have a 11x11 convolution, which has stride equals to 4. We know what is stride, right? By stride, we mean like how much we translate across every movement when you are moving the filter across the image. So we are having an input of 227x227, which is passed through a convolution filter of size 11x11 and stride 4. It is having 97 kernels. By kernel, you mean nothing but like filter. You are having 96 filters. So you get some other output of size 55x55 and yeah, 96 channels. So similarly, they were doing max pooling, but again with stride 2 and 3x3 max pooling they were doing. They were not doing 2x2 pooling. So we know what 2x2 max pooling is, right? You pick a region of 4 pixels and try to find out what is the max value in that. Instead of that, they were actually doing 3x3 max pooling. But only the main thing here is they are not actually doing it for stride 3. They were doing it for stride 2. So it is like kind of behaving similar to 2x2 max pool because stride is 2, but it is done over a region of 9 pixels. So there is a overlap sort of. So, and again, similar kind of architecture is followed. They had 5x5 convolution and then 3x3 max pool again. Again, 3x3 convolution, 3x3 convolution, and similarly you get some fully connected layers and similarly output. So what they have done is they have kept higher convolutions at the beginning to get a higher local features. Once that is done, they have kept lower features at the end. By lower features, I mean like lower filter sizes. So 3x3 is lower than 11x11, right? So in the initial stages, they have used higher sizes, that is 11x11, 5x5, and at the end stages, they have used 3x3. So this is the general structure of AlexNet, sort of. So if you want to implement it, right, it's not very difficult. You know that all these components, what are all these components, right? Con, pool, and all these things. So you can go and look at these components and try to write AlexNet yourself. It's not very difficult because you have already written a simple neural network. You just need to make sure that the values match here. So that is what you can do in case you wanted to implement AlexNet. They have used dropout or regularization, which improved their results, and they used overlapping pooling. By overlapping pooling, what I mean is like they were using 3x3 pooling, but with stride 2 and not stride 3. If they have used stride 3, there would not be any overlapping, but if they have used stride 2, so there is unfortunately I don't have the figure of 3x3 pooling. It will have overlap whenever you are doing a stride of 2. So this is the basic structure of AlexNet. Although AlexNet is something which kind of changed the tide, right? People don't use AlexNet anymore because it was very heavy. So it is just good to know for the sake of history, but it is not much used anywhere in industry nowadays because this is something which came 8 years ago. So very old. And kind of inefficient as well. So yeah, AlexNet is something which not many people use. Then came something called as VGGNet. So this came in 2014, I guess. Yeah, and it had few major improvements over AlexNet. So what I am trying is like I'm trying to come across in the chronological order. So I'm starting from what happened in 1998, 2012, 2014, and so on. So all these architectures which came, right? So everything is an improvement over the previous one. So they have come up with some technique which tries to improve over the previous one and better the results. So what VGGNet did is like it removed all these bigger convolutions. We saw that AlexNet is using 11x11, 5x5, and all kinds of things, right? It tried to standardize the network. So VGG is a very simple network. It has a standard architecture, like using only 3x3 convolutions. It doesn't use any 5x5 or 7x7 or 11x11. Whereas AlexNet used three different kinds of convolutions, right? So why VGGNet used is because you know that we can replace a 5x5 convolution with two 3x3 convolutions consecutively. If you remember that, that is the receptive field thing concept we have talked before. So you can replace a 5x5 convolution with two 3x3. So what they have done is, why do I have to keep this number of bigger convolutions somewhere and smaller convolutions somewhere? Instead of that one, I'll only keep 3x3 convolutions everywhere. So yeah, that is what VGGNet did. I think I don't have the exact figure of VGG. Let me try to Google it. Yeah, so this is the structure of a VGG network. What it has is 3x3 convolutions that are spread across with some pooling layers that are present in between, and finally 3 dense layers. So this is the very simple structure of VG16. And it is called 16 because it has a total 16 layers in together. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. I mean, if you see all the blue parts, right? Ignore the pooling because they don't have any parameters. Apart from pooling, if you see the number of convolution and dense layers, it will come across as 16. So 2 plus 2, 4 plus 3, 7, 10, 13, and plus 3, 16. So total 16 layers are there. So that's why it's called VGG 16. And every convolution is very simple. Only it is like 3 cross 3. Only thing is the number of filters change. So the number of filters is kind of determined across every block. But apart from that, the filter size doesn't change. And this is the standard architecture. You have 3 dense layers at the end, and you will be getting an output. This is the architecture of VGG16. Very simple. I'll try to show some code also, like how to write an architecture like VGG16. Before that, some doubts. They were not having knowledge about it, or techniques were not there. So at that time, techniques were not there. At the time, Lanet time of Lanet, so techniques were not there, and techniques were not there because actually the competition didn't allow people to try a lot of experiments. That's why no one had done that, and because of that, the results were also not there. So how do we decide the number of max pooling? Falex is asking. So how do we do that? Is by random trial and error. That is what people have done, and they have seen like which one is giving the best results, and based on that they have shared their own architecture. So yeah, that is how you determine where to keep the max pooling and all the stuff. But in general, you don't keep it in such a way that you lose a lot of information. If you keep a lot of max pooling, we know that we lose the information, right? So yeah, we try to space it out with a few convolution layers in between so that we don't lose a lot of information. What is kernels? Kernels is nothing but filters. It's just a different name. So kernels is nothing but filters. So how do you do that part? Generally, again, trial and error. You try and see where you can actually keep the max pooling. But again, don't try to keep it very close to each other. Like after every convolution layer, if you keep max pooling, right, that is very bad. Ideally, you should not do that. You should at least have 2-3 convolution layers before you keep another max pooling. Because convolution layers are the ones which extract the features, right? If you don't have enough number of convolution layers, and that means that you're not doing a lot of feature extraction. So that's why you keep 2-3 convolution layers in general and then followed by one max pool. So kernels is nothing but filters, Jashanti. So I have seen some problems still using Lanet. No, actually no one uses Lanet now. So yeah, this is the convolution layer. I think everyone is able to see my notebook, I guess, right? Okay. Yeah. So I have defined what is a convolution layer is. Convolution had activation layer followed by batch nomination and activation function. So this is generally what a convolution layer looks like. And a dense layer again had a dense layer batch nomination activation. We know that every layer we generally keep batch nomination and activation so that it has better properties, right? Batch nomination for normalization and activation to introduce nonlinearity. So that is what I have done. I have defined what a conv layer looks like, what a dense layer looks like. Once this is done, I try to use them sort of. So we know that VGG architecture has so this is the VGG16 architecture. It had 2 conv layers and 1 pooling. So I have defined that. So I have defined one. This is consider this the first conv layer. This is the second conv layer, and I had a pooling. Similarly, after that, I have another block, 2 conv layers and pooling. So that's what I have done. 2 conv layers, 1 pooling, followed by 3 conv layers, 1 pooling. So that is what is there here. You have 3 conv layers, 1 pooling. And another 2 such blocks are there. So I have another block of 3 conv layers, 1 pooling. And again, 3 conv layers, 1 pooling. and then I flatten it out and I keep 3 dense layers, similar to how there are 3 dense layers here, right? So this is how I can translate a architecture which is already present into code. So probably I'll share this notebook with you. You can actually go back and try to change this VGG16 architecture into VGG19 architecture. So VGG19 is an like a small change over VGG16. So you'll have 3 more layers sort of. So yeah, I'll share the block diagram of VGG19 architecture with you. So you can go back and try to modify this source code so that you can make it VGG19. That is just to see like how you can actually tinker and create an architecture sort of yourself based on an architecture diagram. That is the thing. But again, yeah, this is the general structure of a VGG. So it is very simple. You are having only 3x3 convolution across. You are not having multiple convolutions, and the only thing that changes is across layers. Your number of filters changes. So in the first block, you are having only 64 filters. In the second block, you are having only 128 filters. In the third block, 256 512. And 512 is kind of maintained until you again go to dense layers. And in dense layers, you will have 4096, 4096, and finally the number of classes. This is a simple structure of a VGG network. So you can also go back and write this. So this is something you should be able to do with the knowledge we have already. Is VGG clear? Like how the architecture looks like and what are the different components? It should be a very simple architecture, right? I hope it's clear. Then came the inception block. So this is something a little bit complex thing. But before that, I'll try to again add one more thing. So I know that if I have an input of size n cross 32, and I wanted to make it n minus 2 cross n minus 2 cross 64, right? How you can do that? I can pass it through 3 cross 3 filter of 3 cross 3 filter having 32 channels. So it will be 3 cross 3 cross 32 and 64 of them. So I'll be getting n minus 2 cross n minus 2 cross 64. This is something we have seen already before, right? Yeah. So what are the number of parameters that are present? It is nothing but the multiplication of these values. So you are having 3 cross 3 filter, and when you are having 32 channels and 64 of them, so you will be having 3 cross 3 cross 32 cross 64. You will be having 18 4 32 weights. These are the number of weights that are present when you are trying to convert n cross 32 to n minus 2 cross n minus 2 cross 64, right? So what happens is, instead of doing this one, what I can do is I can actually pass it through a 1 cross 1 to reduce the number of channels and then again increase the number of channels using 3 cross 3. So what happens is, if I am having an n cross n input of size 32 cross having 32 filters, if I pass it through 1 cross 1, we know that we can use 1 cross 1 to reduce the number of filters, right? So if I am passing n cross 32 to make it n cross 8, so I need a 1 cross 1 filter. Again, we know that the number of channels in the filter is supposed to be the same as input. So even the 1 cross 1 filter has 32 channels, but again 8 of them are there. So you'll be getting n cross 8 output. And now if I pass it through a filter of size 3 cross 3 cross 8 cross 64, right? I'm getting the same as previous, n minus 2 cross n minus 2 cross 64. Only thing is, I am doing 2 steps. First, I am reducing the number of channels, and again I am increasing the number of channels. I am reducing it 1 cross 1 and again increasing with 3 cross 3. We will see why we do this, but the end output is similar. We are taking n cross 32 and you are converting it to n minus 2 cross n minus 2 cross 64, right? Then task is similar. Only thing is, if you see the number of parameters here, right, you are having one cross one convolution, and similarly 3 cross 3 convolution. The number of parameters in 1 cross 1 is 1 cross 32 cross 8. The number of parameters in 3 cross 3 is 3 cross 3 cross 8 cross 64. So you'll be getting 256 plus 4608, so which is 4864 weights, which is much lesser than 18,432 weights, right? So we are achieving the same thing, converting n cross 32 to n minus 2 cross n minus 2 cross 64, but only 2 stages. But although we are doing it in 2 stages, we are reducing the number of parameters by a significant amount. The number of weights have reduced from 18,432 to 4,864. Through any 3 cross 3 or any higher convolution, right? What you do is you use 1 cross 1 convolution to reduce the number of channels, and then use 3 cross 3 convolution. This way, your number of parameters get reduced. Is this clear how your number of parameters are getting reduced? Yeah, so I'll repeat this. So what I'm doing is I'm having an input of size n cross 32. I'm trying to make it n minus 2 cross n minus 2 cross 64. So how I can do that? The normal methodology that we have seen before is I can pass it through a 3 cross 3 filter of having 32 channels and 64 filters of them. So I'll be getting n minus 2 cross n minus 2 cross 64. The number of parameters is nothing but the number of weights that are present. The number of weights is the filter values. How many filter values are there? 3 cross 3 cross 32 cross 64. If you calculate it, you will get it to 18,432. Right? Now, instead of doing this, what I can do is before passing it to a 3 cross 3 filter, I can pass it through a 1 cross 1 filter to reduce the number of channels. So here I am having 32 channels. Instead of having 32 channels, I can actually reduce it using 1 cross 1 to have only 8 channels. So if I am having only 8 channels, right? Even my 3 cross 3 filter is supposed to have 8 channels only, right? Because of that, the number of parameters in 3 cross 3 is reduced. And the number of parameters that are added by 1 cross 1 is negligible, like only 256 of them. So that's why the overall number of parameters are reduced. So if you see the overall number of parameters, right, what you are having is 1 cross 1 cross 32 cross 8 plus 3 cross 3 cross 8 cross 64. So overall you are having 4,864 parameters only, which is much lesser than 18,432. Right? So we are achieving the same thing. Only thing is you are using 1 cross 1 convolution to reduce the number of parameters. And how you are doing it? You are reducing the channels before passing it to a 3 cross 3 convolution. Right? Is this clear? How we are doing this? Cool. So Inception introduced the same thing. So what they did is any input, right? Previously we saw that there is only one path. So what Inception kept is like instead of having a one path, I have multiple paths of going to the output. So what they do is they have one path which only does this thing. There is another path which does this thing, another path which does this thing, another path which does this thing, and add all of them. So this is like having multiple paths from input to the output. So at every layer, right? At every layer, if you see the Inception architecture, what you do is you are passing input through multiple paths, and whatever the outputs that you are getting, you are summing it up and using it as the output. So this is the Inception block that they have introduced. So Inception block consists of multiple paths. Every path does convolution on top of your input. You get some output. All the outputs that you are getting from all the paths are concatenated together, and that is classified as your output. Why they are doing this? This is because of the receptive field concept only. So now since you are having multiple paths that are going inside, right? So it is like having multiple looks that are present. So not only you are looking at 3 cross 3 region, you are also looking at a 5 cross 5 region and also a 1 cross 1 region sort of. This is like having looking at multiple things sort of. Whenever you are doing a convolution, you are not only looking at the 3 cross 3 region around you, but you are also looking at the 5 cross 5 region, and you are also looking at some other point of region and taking information from all of these and concatenating together. That is what your Inception block is doing sort of. So it is trying to get multiple information. not only your 3x3 information, but also your 5x5 information, and fusing these two informations. So now your network has more capability. Like it is not only looking at a local area, but is also looking at a bigger local area and taking all this information every time whenever it is doing. Right. So this is what your inception block introduced, and you are having these kind of inception blocks, a lot of them. You start from the input, and then you have one inception block. You get the output from that one inception block. You give it to another inception block, and you continue this process. This is the entire concept of inception block. But again, if you see everything that is present in an inception block, right, it has 4 things. So if you see the first one, what it is doing is it is just passing it through a 1x1 filter. So what it will do is it will reduce the number of outputs. I mean, reduce the number of channels and give it. Another path is you are passing it through a 1x1 followed by 3x3. So why we are passing it through this 1x1 before passing it through 3x3? We are doing this because we wanted to reduce the number of parameters, like we have seen before. That is why we are doing this. Another path is again like you are trying to do 5x1 convolution, but you directly doing 5x5 convolution will have a lot of parameters. So before that you do 1x1 convolution. And you have another max pooling sort of. Again, this is max pooling, but again, you don't do with highest right, you do with the lowest right. You take all these things and concatenate together and send it to the output. So this is like having multiple paths where information is flowing, and you are taking all this information and concatenating together. This is what inception architecture proposed. Is this clear what inception architecture is? It is a little bit complex architecture. But yeah, what it is doing is it is not only looking at a local information, but it is also looking at a bigger local information, taking information from multiple patches and concatenating together to get a much better picture. So the network is more capable now, sort of, compared to previously, where there is only single path. Previously, there is only single path from input to output, right? Since there are multiple paths from every input to every output layer, so the information that is present is much more higher than the before. So that's why it's giving better results compared to the before networks. So this is a much complex network than the what we have seen for VGG, where there was only like straight connections from left to right. Here, since there is a block kind of thing, so it's a little bit more complex. But yeah, this introduced better results compared to previous. Is this clear inception architecture? How about others? Yeah, so I am actually just giving a brief of all these architectures so that you will know that all these architectures are present, and I'm not going into the depth. But in case you are interested in any architecture, you can go back and read all of them. Okay, then we have the ResNet architecture. So ResNet is something which was very popular in 2015 and afterwards. So yeah, I'll tell you about the significance of this. The main concept of deep learning is as you increase the depth of the neural network, right, your results are supposed to become better. So as you add more layers, you are supposed to get better results. So instead of having 20 layers in my neural network, if I have 200 layers, I'm supposed to get better results. This is the assumption sort of when someone got started with deep learning. But what they have seen is it was the reverse. So 20 layer network was giving better results than 200 layer network. Why is this? That is something people try to see why it was happening. So ResNet tried to, I mean, the people who are researching on ResNet, they went out and saw like, why is it happening? Why is the deeper network not giving better results? And what they have seen is, if you are having a very deep network, right, information doesn't actually flow from input to output because it is very deep. It gets died out somewhere in between. So since the network depth is very big, the gradient is not flowing from input to output. I mean, and because of that, it is stopping somewhere in between, and that's why it is not giving better results. Think of it like there is an information signal that needs to go from one point to another point, and if the path is very big, right, it might be possible that the information might be lost somewhere, right? So this kind of thing is possible in general because the path is very big. So because of that, the bigger network is performing very poorer compared to the smaller networks. Not very poorer, but poorer than that, which was kind of contradicting. So what ResNet did is like they provided alternate paths so that the signal can flow. It is using this concept called shortcut. connection. So what shortcut connection does is it is similar to the concept in electricity. So if you are, instead of passing it through a resistor, if you directly connect it with a wire, right, you call it shortcut, right? So ResNet did the same as well. We know that if you pass through a convolution layer, you will get to an output, right? What shortcut did is it directly provided the input to the output layer without having a convolution in between. So there are two paths similar to what we saw in inception block. You are having two paths. One path is with convolution, one path is without convolution, and you add both these values. So that is what ResNet did. So if you see this figure, right? So what ResNet did is instead of passing it through a weight and getting it to the output, you have another shortcut connection also, which adds directly to the convoluted output and pass it through the network. So why we need this? We saw that if the signal is flowing from input to the output like this, right? This is the general neural network. If your signal is passing from the input to the output after every block, it might die down in between. So what I will do is I'll create a shortcut from every block to the next block. This upper arrow you see, right? It is a shortcut. So you are having network information flowing like this also, but you have another shortcut so that information flows without the convolution block also. So you add these two information. So even if network dies here, there is a shortcut which will make the information flow through the alternate path, right? So you are having this shortcut that is present across every block, so that anywhere the information might die, there is a shortcut path so that there is a way to reach the output. So this is what ResNet introduced, this shortcut path, similar to how there is a shortcut connection in electric network. Is this clear how ResNet is kind of making deep networks perform better? Right? It is doing this because it introduced these skip connections or shortcut paths across every layer, so that the information doesn't die out. It can be propagated at least in the alternate path, right? I hope this part is clear, because this is something which we will use when we are talking about DenseNet. Is this clear how ResNet works and how is it made deep networks perform better? So before that, there were no shortcut paths and the signal used to die out. That's why deep networks were kind of performing bad. But once you have these shortcuts, there is an alternate way for the information to flow, and the deep networks started performing better than the shallower networks. Is this clear? So we keep both the paths, both the convolution path and the shortcut path. So the information flows from both the paths, and that information is passed to the next layer. So the path is, I mean, both the paths are present. It's not like the information only passes through one layer, I mean, one path. Both the paths is present and information passes through both the paths. Only thing is, why we are having this shortcut connection is because like if through the main path, the information flow stopped. At least through the shortcut path, there is a shortcut through which the information flows. That's why you have the shortcut path. But other than that, there is no difference sort of. So this is called skip connection. It is a very popular way to pass information from one layer to another layer. If you want to pass information from one layer to another layer without I mean, going through the hurdles that are present. By hurdles, I mean the different convolutional and pooling layers that are present in between. You can skip all this and make a direct connection from one layer to another layer. This is called as a skip connection. In ResNet, we saw that we have a skip connection between every other layer. Only the, I mean, current layer and the next layer, we have a skip connection. We try to skip the convolution block in between. DenseNet is an extension on top of that one. What DenseNet does is it will have a skip connection between every other layer to every other layer. So if I'm having multiple convolution layers, right? So say I'm at the third convolution layer. So the third convolution layer gets the skip connection not only from the previous second one, but it also gets a skip connection from the first one. So if I'm at 4, I get a skip connection not only from 3, but only from 2 and 1 also. In a ResNet, it used to happen that you only get information from the previous block. You only have skip connection from the previous block. So if I'm at 5, I only get a skip connection from 4. If I'm at 3, I only get skip connection from 2. But in case of dense net, what happens is you get skip connection from every previous layer that is present. So you have a lot of connections. So we saw that previously network is defined to go from left to right. Now you have connections from left to somewhere in the middle as well. So it becomes a much more complex network. So this is what dense net does. It is called dense net because you have a dense layer of connections across. So that's why it's called a dense net. So this is entire thing is called a block. Dense net consists of multiple blocks like this, and every block has these kind of dense connections in between. So this is the entire structure of a dense net. Again, I am not very clearly explaining it because you can go back and look through any architecture you are interested. Because if I need to go through every architecture in detail, right, it will take a lot of time. But I have, and what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to give the main points that are present. Once you know that any architecture you see, right, those are just a like a simple change over the general architectures that we have discussed. So they will have some other simple thing that they have added or not, but the overall way the architectures and what are all the improvements that we have seen over the years is these things like ReLU introduction, batch normalization, and then standardizing with only 3x3 convolutions, and then you are having that multiple paths that can be present that is introduced in inception block, and then bottleneck connection that can be present. By bottleneck, I mean like instead of having a 3x3 convolution, you can replace it with a 1x1 followed by 3x3 to reduce the number of layers, right? So that is one thing. And another thing is the ResNet. That is ResNet is the most important thing, which made deep learning, deep networks very popular. And then again, you can improve on top of ResNet and have an architecture like DenseNet as well. So yeah, these are very popular architectures, sort of whenever someone gets started with classification. So any doubt anywhere so far in all the architectures that we have discussed? I know we have gone very fast, sort of, but to cover all the architectures, I have to go fast. But nevertheless, if you have any doubt, right, please raise it. Okay, cool. So whatever architectures that you have seen so far, those are very heavy. So those are not something you can keep on mobile. But if you want to go for mobile, right? So there are architectures like MobileNet, which are much smaller in size compared to DenseNet or ResNet. So you can look into them. So I'll talk about few techniques which can help you to make your training proper. Yeah, so that is something I'll show as well. So yeah, before that, I'll just talk about few techniques which are very popular, or maybe I'll just show the code once before we get started with these techniques. So this is your assignment. You will be working on CFARTN dataset. It is similar to like MNIST. Only thing is it has multiple classes, and again, it is not a black and gray image, black and white image. So not a grayscale image. It is a uh, RGB image. So you'll be having three channels. So that's why it's more complex than much complex than MNIST. And if you apply ANN, you will not be getting any good result. You are supposed to go with the CNN only. So yeah, what I have done is like these architectures, right? These are actually present already defined in Keras, so you can directly use them instead of like trying to write the architecture from scratch. But in case you are interested to, you can do that, but it will take some time. So for this use case, what we have done is like we have just imported the DenseNet from Keras. So once we done that, we are saying that the input size for CFARTN is supposed to be 32 cross 32. So that is what we have kept. After that, you can actually go through the architecture. It's a very big network, so it will take a lot of time to see the summary also. So it's a very big network having a lot of layers. So yeah, I defined all the other things and then try to train. So yeah, this is a network that I have trained with not very optimal parameters. That's why it's giving only 72% test accuracy. But you should go back and train this network to cross 90% accuracy. That is our target at the end. So again, keep in mind the most important techniques that we have discussed: image augmentation and similarly uh, LR scheduling. How do you change the learning rate? So if you are able to tune those properly, you should be able to cross 85% accuracy. And then with some more effort, you should be able to cross 90% accuracy. So I'll be sharing the assignment. It will take some time. So please put some effort. It is going to be very helpful. So yeah, whenever you face some error or not error, like whenever you are stuck with the accuracy or something, post it in the group. We'll try to help each other and try to move forward. So yeah, that is how you use these models in code. I have not talked about how these multiple paths can be implemented, but again, we have talked about only sequential API, which can only help you to get a linear path. But if you want to implement these multiple paths, right? So there is something called as functional API, which you can use to implement these multiple paths. I have not talked about it here. We have not discussed it so far, but since we are directly using a code, you can directly use that model and try to train. We are more concerned about the hyperparameter tuning rather than creating the network from scratch. But in case if you are trying to create the network from scratch, you can explore the functional API. You can use that to create a network with multiple paths. Yeah, these models are already predefined, so we can use them as a function directly. ImageNet model. ImageNet is actually not a model. ImageNet is the dataset similar to CFART and MNest, right? So ImageNet is a dataset, and all these models are actually trained on ImageNet, and similarly CFART and many other as well. So yeah, ImageNet is not a model. ImageNet is a dataset. So yeah, I'll talk about few techniques which will help you. One is the LR reducer. What LR reducer does is you start with a higher learning rate, but you reduce the learning rate as you go on, as someone has mentioned already previously. And why you do this is because when you are reaching your correct position, right, you don't want to like struggle a lot. You want it to uh, get to the optimal position, right? So that's why you start with a higher learning rate. And whenever you see that your model is actually not converging, you try to reduce the learning rate. So there is something called as LR reducer in Keras. So what it does is it will see over like 5 iterations or something like that. If the accuracy is not improving, right, it will reduce the learning rate itself. So that is something you can use that should help you. Or if that is not there, you can actually manually set the learning rate such that for first 20 epochs, the learning rate is supposed to be 0.01. For next 50 epochs, the learning rate is supposed to be 0.05, something like that. Yeah, you can do something like that as well. There are other techniques which I have mentioned here, but I will not talk about it because these are complex, I guess. So let's not discuss about it. But yeah, LR reducer is something you should definitely use. These are all techniques that I have mentioned: progressive resizing, test time augmentation, differential learning rate, transfer learning. These are all not required for this use case. But if you are trying to go for some other use case, these are techniques which will generally help you. Learning rate also, there are multiple ways to tune learning rate. So we are talking about LR reducer, but there is something called as LR finder as well, which will tell you what is the exact learning rate to start out with. So that is something you can explore, but probably not required for this assignment. And then you have something like as cyclic learning rate as well. What cyclic learning rate does is like, you know that you start with a higher learning rate and you reduce it as you go on, right? But what happens is if the learning rate is too slow, you can get stuck in local minima. So to get out of local minima, you change the learning rate and you increase it again, and you again try to decrease it. So you have this cyclic way of increasing it and decreasing it and increasing it and decreasing it, so on until you reach a highest accuracy. So that is the cyclic learning rate concept. Again, that is something which is not required for this assignment, I guess. Yeah, so you only need to change the classification layer for this purpose. So in the code I have mentioned, there is nothing you need to change in the model as such, because you can directly give a parameter saying that the number of classes is supposed to be 10. It will directly create the network for you. So you don't need to tinker with the architecture anymore. Only thing you need to tinker with is the different regularization techniques. So that is something I'm leaving it open to you, so that you try out image augmentation, learning rate, batch size, all those things. Optimizer. Similarly, I have kept Adam, but you see that Adam will not give you good results. You need to go for SGD. Again, with momentum and things like that. Okay, so yeah, further steps after this, like once we are done with the course, right? Because this is the last class, and you are going to complete the assignment. Once you are done this, uh, you can go forward and see the other topics that are present in deep learning. We have only covered classification, but there is also object detection, segmentation, and various other techniques as well. So what we have discussed so far in our first class, if you remember, right? Image generation, creativity, and all those stuff. So you can go forward and try to learn them. Those concepts are based on this. So once you understand how a basic deep learning works, right, you can actually extend it and make it work for the other use cases as well. So you can try it out. And after that, whenever you try out on something, right, what you do is you need to post it on LinkedIn or Medium, so that your profile becomes better. And why you need to do this is because in my career, I have gotten many opportunities by doing this. So I have posted content on Medium, LinkedIn, and many people have reached out to me either for job opportunity or like any other kind of opportunity. Even when I wanted to shift internally in my company, right? So I tried to approach another manager. He searched my name on internet and he was able to like find blogs that were present on the topics, and he saw that those topics are relevant to the work they were doing, and so he was happy to hire me. And similarly, there were a few other people who actually liked the content I posted, and they reached out to me saying that, are you interested in moving out or switching on or trying out a different opportunity? So yeah, that is something which is very helpful for you as well. So we know that if I post a job on LinkedIn saying that I want an engineer for deep learning, I'll get very immediately 500 resumes. And if you want to stand out in this is how you try to stand out. That is by making your profile popular. So if you make your profile popular either by blogging or like by sharing content or LinkedIn and stuff, you should be able to like stand out from other people. And yeah, you can explore NLP. And one more thing is do as many internships as possible, even if you are not getting a lot of money. If you are able to get a lot of learning, right? Try to do that, because that is something which will help you in the long run. Yeah, so the certificate, you should be getting it in the next coming few days. So yeah, Board Infinity will get back to you to distribute the certificate. But for that, you need to complete the assignment. So I'm sharing the assignment. Try to get at least 85% accuracy. Once we are done that, you should be able to get the certificate. Yeah, so how do you apply for a better internship? That is something you need to go through the requirements that you will know, like, regarding the company, what are the positions that are open and so on. That way you will know, like, which is a better internship and not. But do as many internships as possible. That is how you go through into the industry. If you are a fresher, if you are already experienced, it's fine. But if you are a fresher, you need to do internships. You don't do, actually, you don't have any open source projects or something like that. What you need to do is try out different data sets. So like CFA10 is something that I have shown, right? So like that, there are many other data sets. Try to get some decent accuracy on top of that one. After that, try to create a data set yourself. So you can create a data set by going outside and clicking pictures, or maybe downloading images from the Google, create a data set and try to run a neural network on top of that one and get some good results. Try to create your own classifier of whatever maybe. So maybe a classifier of your cell phone versus bottle or something like that. That should actually give you better understanding of the entire process of collecting data, cleaning data, and similarly developing the model. And it also impresses your employer that you have done end-to-end a mod project. So that is how you create a project. Yeah, I think we have gone a little bit faster today because we had to cover a lot of concepts. But yeah, we'll stay connected on the WhatsApp group. We'll try to discuss things which are not clear over the next week. Similarly, we'll try to get that assignment and cross 90% accuracy. Apart from that, you can stay connected with me on LinkedIn as well. I'll be sharing content and similarly blogs related to that stuff. And yeah, please share feedback regarding the course. How did you feel the courses, and what are the things you feel like missing, or something which would have been better if they are there. So to Board Infinity, and you can share it here as well, so that next time when we come up with the similar kind of course, it would be helpful for us. So there is no year where you should start. You start now. Try to find internships wherever possible. So people are doing internships from first year itself. I have seen people who are doing that, because as many internships you have, as much better your profile becomes. So there is no point that you need to start doing it from third year or fourth year. Start whenever you can. As many internships you have, the better your profile becomes. And also you will get a lot of learning in case you do your internship. Platforms, probably Board Infinity will be having more information as to how you can apply platforms in various platforms. Generally, people use Naukri.com or things like that. Apart from that, you can use LinkedIn or Glassdoor as well. So these things should help. I generally, whenever I'm looking out for a job or something, I generally use LinkedIn and Glassdoor. Yeah, Internshala is something which is good as well, I guess. Internshala, Naukri.com, all these. Not exactly, no, not true. As long as you are able to get the results right, online, offline doesn't matter. I mean, it's just like the course that we have. Does it make any difference if we have told you in front of you or if I'm telling it from online? Because the content is the same, right? So same thing like that as well. So online and offline doesn't make any difference as long as the learning is there. So I'll share the assignment. Please try the assignment. Use different techniques. I'll be sharing articles also, which can help you to get better results. So it is going to be tougher than the assignments that we have seen so far. So that should give you a very good project sort of to show off in your resume, and similarly, good understanding, good learning, both in the theoretical and practical sense to go forward and apply for any internship. So whatever we have covered so far is already good. You already have a lot of information. So it's actually pretty great that you all people are able to learn so much in very less amount of time. So I think it is just around 10 days, I guess. We have covered a lot of content in the 10 days. It's actually pretty awesome that you are able to like stay back and cover this much amount of content in 10 days, because what we have covered, right, it is actually uh, a little bit complex information, and similarly something which needs time for someone to digest and understand. But you people were able to like do it in around 10 days. It would, and when I started out, it would take me around 1 month or something like that to understand all these things together. But you people were able to like do it in 1 week almost, sort of. So that's something which is pretty great. So yeah, we'll try to work on this, try to get better results. That would improve both our practical and similarly the theoretical knowledge, and similarly keep posting the doubts that you're having or any issues wherever you are stuck or things like that. We'll try and cross that both the 85 and 90% accuracy barrier. Yeah, cool. Cool, then we are done with the course. This course by itself should be self-sufficient for you to continue your deep learning journey from here. So yeah, there are openings. There are a lot of openings for the freshers. Actually, if you see, right, there is a reverse problem, sort of. There are many openings, but there are not many people with the relevant experience. So that is something which is kind of a problem, because not many people have this knowledge of either the theory or the practical part. So there are many jobs floating around, but people who are not eligible, sort of, they're still applying. So if you are able to like, since you have done this course, you are already good enough in certain areas. So you are more eligible than them. So you should be able to apply for these internships or even jobs also. So actually the thing is reverse sort of. And it's not that, I mean, there are a lot of people and there are no jobs. Actually, it's the reverse. The number of jobs are there, but the number of people who are capable are not there. So, I mean, there are a lot of people applying, but there are not of a lot of people with the relevant amount of skills. So, yeah, if you are able to develop those relevant amount of skills, you should be able to get, yeah, the job. Visualizations, yes, in machine learning, it makes sense to visualization and all those things. In deep learning, we don't have a lot of visualizations because you actually directly can visualize the image, right? Because it's just an image, you can directly see it. So you don't need a lot of visualizations as such, but there are visualizations to see where the network is looking. So we are not covering it as part of the course, but yeah, Tableau and all makes sense for not for image data, right? Tableau and all is for tabular data. So we don't use generally deep learning for tabular data, use machine learning sort of. So again, visualizations and all those things that come under the task of someone who is into analytics, not a machine learning engineer. So it is kind of a different field or sort of. What are the pre-processing steps? So the normalization, whatever we have done, right? Input normalization, that is something you need to do. Apart from that, not much. You don't need to actually a lot of pre-processing. A lot of pre-processing is needed for machine learning or stuff like that. Deep learning doesn't need a lot of pre-processing. Only just do basic normalization, that should be enough. Okay. Yeah, that course content is different from this course. In this course, there are no visualizations because we are working on images. We are not working on tabular data. Shivam, there are not a lot of pre-processing steps which you need to take care of. Only thing is you need to do the normalization, input normalization, and we don't need these pre-processing steps because we know that deep learning takes care of it itself. So it doesn't need a lot of pre-processing. Machine learning needs a lot of pre-processing, but deep learning doesn't need a lot of pre-processing. Only input normalization. Great then. Yeah, keep posting your doubts in the WhatsApp group. Yeah, once you are able to like complete the assignment, you should be able to get the certificates. Great then. Yeah, thanks everyone.